The challenge had run the same way for 40 cycles, and Cadet Marshal Vorek's showdown meant to make it 41. I was 11th in the new intake row at Anvil Reach, ration bar half gone, when he peeled off from the senior line and read the words every intake had heard since the hall was cut into the asteroid's rock. "Tellus stock. Step forward and be measured." Anvil Reach ran cold and bright, the way every Korrathi training platform did, white deck plating, blue strip lighting along the seams, recycled air that always smelled faintly of ozone and metal polish. The intake hall was the first room any new cadet saw, and the challenge board mounted above the dais had 40 names on it, one per cycle, each one logged the same, measured, compliant, assigned. Nobody had ever needed a 41st column. I stepped forward, I kept chewing. Vorek's strike came the way it always came, open palm, controlled, calibrated to rock a new cadet back on her heels, so the senior class could log compliance and move to the next name on the roster. 40 cycles of intake records said the same thing happened next. The cadet stepped back, took it, learned where she stood. The hand was most of the way to my shoulder when I shifted my weight onto my back foot and let it pass through the space where my shoulder had been a half-second earlier. His palm met air, his balance went with it. I caught his wrist on the way by, not hard, just enough to keep the rotation going where his own arm already wanted to take it, and set him down on the deck plate with about as much ceremony as setting down a tray. The hall went quiet in the specific way. A room goes quiet when 40 cycles of muscle memory just produced a result nobody in it had a category for. Vorek was up in under 2 seconds. Warrior caste pride moves faster than warrior caste sense, and this time the strike wasn't a measuring blow. His hand opened into the claw grip that closed a challenge. Catch the collar, pin the cadet to the deck until she said the word out loud for the record. I let him get the grip. Then I turned my hip a quarter turn, dropped my center under his, and used his own forward weight to fold him over my shoulder. He hit the deck on his back hard enough that the ration crates along the bulkhead rattled. Cadre Commander Vale Doru, slate purple, 3 reflective eye ridges, standing at the dais with a data slate she hadn't looked at once since the challenge began, looked at it now. "Designation," she said, not to me, to the slate. "Cole Senna, Tellus Class 15 Intake Roster, Item 11, someone read back from the line behind me. Vorek came up a third time. He didn't reach for the ritual grip again. He pulled the training baton off his hip. Inside the rules, the baton was always inside the rules. That was the entire point of issuing one, and came at me in the standard disabling arc, the one that had ended 40 challenges with a cadet on the floor holding a numb arm and a new appreciation for hierarchy. I stepped into the arc instead of away from it, took the baton out of his hand somewhere around the midpoint of the swing, and didn't hit him with it. I just held it, the way you'd hold a door someone had tried to slam on you. He looked at the baton in my hand like it had betrayed him personally. "Again," he said, and his voice climbed half a register. "Cadre Marshal Tovish observed this. The intake item is—" "I'm watching," Tovish said from somewhere behind me. Tovish was the other senior on duty, insectoid, blue chitinous, 4 eye clusters mounted in a band across his skull, and from the flatness of his voice he'd been watching since the second takedown, and writing as he watched. Vorek straightened, and for the first time since the challenge had started, he didn't come at me again right away. He turned to the dais instead. "Cadre Commander, I invoke second measure." Doru's eye ridges flattened, which I'd learned later was the Korrathi equivalent of a long breath. Second measure existed for the rare cadet whose baseline reading came back wrong on the first pass. A calibration problem, in theory, not a combat one. It authorized one additional attempt, at elevated intensity, before the challenge was logged as anomalous and escalated to the Academy Registrar. In 40 cycles, it had been invoked twice, and both times the cadet being measured had failed the first attempt because of equipment malfunction, not because the equipment had worked exactly as designed, and produced an answer the room didn't like. "Granted," Doru said, and the word came out flatter than the rest of her sentences had. "Logged." Vorik reached into the pouch on his belt and pulled out a synthadrenal patch, the kind issued only for second measure attempts. He slapped it against his own throat without asking permission from the dais, which I learned later was itself a violation, though nobody stopped him. His pupils went from amber to white in under a second. The chitin plates along his forearm stood up, the way a dog's hackles do, except his were armor. "Designation," Doru said again, and this time there was an edge under the word that hadn't been there before. Vorik showed on, "Note the patch." He came at me a fourth time, and this one wasn't measured at all. 40 cycles of challenges existed because the challenge worked, and a senior cadet whose challenge had stopped working had exactly one instinct left, which was to make the next attempt bigger. He came in low and fast, both arms wide, the kind of rush that ends with a cadet's spine against the deck and a senior's knee on her throat, for the record. I set my ration bar down on the rail behind me. That was the only part of the next several seconds that took any thought at all. I caught his lead arm, turned it past the point his shoulder wanted to allow, and put him face down on the deck with my knee between his shoulder blades, not crushing, just there, the way you'd hold down a hatch in a depressurization. He couldn't see my face from that angle. I don't think it would have told him much if he could have. "Yield," I said, flat. It was the same word the challenge script gave to whichever side won. The hall held still long enough that I could hear the recyclers in the bulkhead, and somewhere down the line, one of the other new intakes breathing through their mouth. "Yield," Vorik said. It came out smaller than I think he meant it to. I let him up. He didn't look at me again. He looked at Tovish, and then at Doru, and something in his face went from certain to careful, which, on a warrior caste korrathi, I'd learn later was about as close to begging as the species came on the record. "Cadre Commander," he said, and the patch was already burning off, leaving his voice thinner than it had started. "Request clarification of intake protocol. The challenge assumes a baseline response curve. This designation did not register fear escalation at any measured stage. Second measure assumed equipment fault. There was no equipment fault." "I know what the challenge assumes," Doru said. She hadn't moved from the dais the entire time. She tapped something into the slate, and the overhead display, the one that had run the same 40-cycle challenge roster on a loop since before any of us in the new intake row had been born, went dark. "Cole, Senna, tellus class 15, she said again, to no one in particular, and made a note I never saw the rest of. "Item 11, skip challenge protocol for the remaining roster, effective immediately. Forward the readings to the registrar as a baseline revision, not an anomaly. Mark it for review at the next intake cycle and the one after that." Nobody told the rest of the intake row why the challenge stopped halfway down the line. Nobody told them what skip challenge protocol, effective immediately, meant for the 40-second cycle, or any cycle after it, only that the senior class filed out without reading another name off the roster, and that the board above the dais stayed dark for the rest of the shift. The silence they left with had a different shape than the one they'd come in with, the kind that comes from a room recalculating something it had stopped checking decades ago, and finding it didn't like where the new number landed. I picked my ration bar back up off the rail. It was still warm from my hand. I finished it on the walk to the barracks, and nobody behind me, not Vorik, not Tovish, not the 10 cadets still waiting on a challenge that would never come, said one word the entire way. 40 cycles. The challenge had measured every new arrival the same way, and gotten the same answer every time. It only took one try to find out. It had never been measuring the right thing at all.